Tere hommikust!
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, participants. I'm very pleased to be here. We talk about integration, segregation, and the topic of diaspora, or the different communities that live abroad. So when we talk about Estonians abroad, then we always discuss a different context of policies. So linking integration and diaspora, this is actually quite unique because the world is open, people move, they travel, study, work abroad. But at the same time, we keep in touch with our home country. So what does it mean for those who have gone abroad, for the target country that they have gone to? This is the topic that we will discuss today. And these communities of people abroad in different countries, other continents, or in Estonia, they're not homogeneous. Often things depend on the historical context, how these communities have emerged. I have the pleasure to lead this panel today. We have interesting presenters from the UK, Estonia, Ukraine. We're going to have a look at how these issues are reflected in different countries, what has been researched, what has been learned, and what could be improved on the national and local levels. I am pleased to welcome Richard Gale from the University of Cardiff, and he's a senior lecturer in human geography in the School of Geography and Planning. He has studied the Muslim identity and the Muslim communities in Wales and the issues of segregation that are to do with people with a different religious background, different race. How have they coped in their new home countries? And how do they sort of keep in touch? And what do they think about Somalia, where they come from?
I really would like to ask you now to take the floor. And I told to my good colleagues here and participants that you are the professor of human geography in the School of Geography and Planning of the Cardiff University. And you have researched British Muslim identity, ethno-religious segregation, and the relationship between religious diversity and local government's planning. And as I know, Cardiff is a very important city in the UK, in Wales. It's the capital. And really this diaspora of Muslims in this city and this region is already very old and connected with your history, with a large coal port in Cardiff. And it's interesting to know how you have solved these problems of segregation and also how you help people just could avoid discrimination in this city and in this region. Thank you very much, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this very kind invitation and a very generous offer to participate. So I've just got a little time, so I'll just go straight in. So as per the introduction, this is research that I'm doing. I've been doing on and off for a long time, actually, on segregation in the Cardiff context. I'm just making sure this clicker works. There we are. So I'm going to talk about the general trend of segregation research in the UK. I know other participants, Gemma Catney, for example, will talk about these things in perhaps more detail than I shall. But just to set the scene for what I'm going to talk about today, really there are I guess kind of two key themes I want to get across in this short time. One is that segregation in the UK context has been falling, and this is a good thing. People are living in more mixed neighbourhoods, but there are still lingering issues of racism and racialization that characterize the interactions between people of different backgrounds in urban space. And I'm going to be talking much more about the latter So I'll say a few things about segregation, and then I want to talk about some of my emerging data from research with the Somali diaspora in Cardiff. So as I'm saying, the work, the scholarship in the UK context on segregation has been very powerful. It's based upon very careful analysis of census data. We have good social statistics in the UK, which tracks, because of questions on ethnicity and also more recently religion, we can track the identity of the population and population movements at the very micro scale, at fine spatial scales. And it's very powerful, it's very important. This work on segregation, showing how segregation has been falling in the UK, has challenged popular prejudices and perceptions that segregation in the UK is increasing. We know from the work of demographers and social geography that that segregation is falling in the UK. But as I say, we also know that there are issues. Some of them were brought to light in the recent Black Lives Matter events and movement, that there are still persistent issues of race and racialized perceptions of otherness that need to be overcome for us to find, as per the conference, the middle ground, and to begin to properly integrate in ways that overcome race and racism. So I'll just say a little bit about the background scholarship. I don't have the data to hand, but you have to take on trust from what I'm saying, that as before, the work of geographers and demographers has been very powerful in looking at patterns of internal migration, patterns of natural growth in situ, but also patterns of movement. What neighborhoods people are moving into, out of more concentrated areas in the old cores of cities, and as before, it's been very powerful scholarship, very census driven in falsifying popular portrayals, particularly of Muslim groups. There's been a persistent characterization of Muslims in Britain as culturally inward and backward looking, as introspective, and self-segregating. And so this work has been extremely powerful in overcoming some of that popular perception. Again, quoting recent work by Gemma Catney, we know that to quote, the decreases in segregation that are evidenced in her work support the somewhat everyday and benign processes of sleepwalking into desegregation, rather than cause for concern over increasingly entrenched neighbourhoods. So that's if you like the good news, and that we expect will continue to be the case. We're awaiting the detailed outputs of the most recent census, the 2021 census, but it's expected that trend will have continued over the last decade. However, as I say, much of this work, powerful though it is still very census driven, and there are just limits to what can be shown through the census. It's not able to pose some of the important questions, some of the fine-grained questions about how people interact, what kinds of perceptions people are exposed to, what kinds of racial categorizations people are exposed to in their neighborhoods. Now, there is another strand. Again, this is very much focused on the UK, although it is partly international. Another strand of emerging research, which is looking at cross-cultural encounters. Now, there's a methodological issue running through what I'm saying. This is very qualitative. If the work of census analysts is very quantitative, it's very much about numbers and demography. This work on encounters is very much about qualitative interviewing, ethnography, and fine-grained engagement with local communities. And it offers some potential to just explore what's actually happening at the level of experience in terms of changing neighborhoods and the broader, if you like, tectonic patterns of neighborhood change shown through demography. And so this is work that I've been doing. I've been doing work across these modes, both the census analysis and exploring encounters, to kind of challenge some of the problems, or overcome some of the problems in broad demographic analysis, and look at really what's happening in terms of people's lived experience of race and racism, looking at it through the lens of the Somali community in Cardiff. Now there are some problems with encounters research in itself. In some ways, the strength is its weakness. By focusing at such a micro scale, it sort of becomes divorced from it. It becomes adrift from the bigger picture in terms of neighborhood change. There's also a tendency to overlook some of the problems. Encounters between people of different backgrounds, we know, are very powerful in forming bonds of trust and powerful friendship relationships, and therefore overcoming some of the entrenched patterns of prejudice. This is actually a tradition of work that goes all the way back to the social psychology work of Allport and so on in the 1950s. So encounters are very, very important, but they also have their problems. What happens where you have antagonistic encounters? What happens where racial categorization is embedded in the way in which people meet each other and or even avoid each other on the streets in local areas? So there is work to be done on this front as well, if we're to kind of combine the insights of census analysis with the accounts of encounters. I think there are two things here that I want to stress. How do we link, in short, across from the micro scale of experience to the wider social patterns and structures and demographic trends in society at large? And the missing part of the picture, which is why it's in my title, is the focus on race at the societal level, and how race is threaded through society at all levels and all institutions, and something which is framed very much in critical race theory. Critical race theory, it originates in the United States. It's an outcome of the civil rights movement. It emerged actually in legal scholarship, but has a much wider sociological and geographical focus. And increasingly, it's being looked to, particularly in the post Black Lives Matter era, in other societies as well. Societies like Britain, which has a long history and legacy because of imperialism and colonialism, of race being embedded in its social structure. So critical race theory, it offers one way of looking at the connections between wider social structuring and patterns of change, and the everyday microscale interactions between people of different backgrounds. Two key things to tease out from critical race theory. There's much I could say about it that I don't have time to. It emphasizes racialization as an everyday process. It's from processes of racialization that the categories of race become salient and reified. And it also claims, secondly, that critical race, that race is historically embedded in societies because of histories and legacies. So the institutions become bound up with processes of racialization. A key thinker drawn on in this body of work, the critical race theory, is Frantz Fanon. I won't quote him at length, but if anyone's familiar with his work, a key work, Black Skin, White Masks, it's all about looking at the social psychology of race formation, and how ideas of race become embodied, internalized psychologically within people's thinking and interactions. There's this one little quote here. He talks about an interaction between himself and a white man on the street. The other fixes me with his gaze, his gestures, and his attitude, and the way, and in the same way that you look at the preparation of a dye, i.e., he's being objectified. I lose my temper, and I demand an explanation, but nothing doing. I explode. These are the fragments put together by another me. what he's talking about is the dissolution of his sense of self because of exposure to the gaze, the white gaze, and of racialization. This is very consistent with the critical race theory approach, and again offers scope to look across the micro scale of interaction at which racialization occurs, and how it links to the wider structures of society in which race is being reified and articulated. These are actually longer slides than I'd thought. So this is the longer version of my presentation, so I'll go quite quickly through this section. As I said, this is work that I'm doing with the Somali community in Cardiff. Cardiff has a long-standing community of Somalis. They are a strong diaspora. They have strong ties to the Somaliland homeland. Somaliland was previously a protectorate of the British Empire, and there was a long tradition of Somalis working on the merchant ships of the British Navy, and they jumped ship and they stayed in the port cities of the UK, in Cardiff, in Liverpool, in Bristol, and in London, and then subsequently moved inland to places like Birmingham and Sheffield. Very, very long-standing communities. I'm very proud of, in my part of the world, of being both British and Welsh, but also Somali and Somalilander. I'll skip over this a little bit, but it is important to remember that there is this historical imperial link. It goes back to the point about critical race and the imperial legacies that shape and frame encounters between people of different racialized backgrounds, including in neighbourhoods in places like Cardiff. It's very difficult to enumerate this population, so this is also already a frustration of the kind of the census-driven approach. There's no category of Somali in the census. Most Somalis in the census would identify under the categories of Black African or Black Other or Other Black. And so we're working with estimates here. It's estimated that in Cardiff the population is around 10,000. It's probably more than that. And many of those are British born. And it's a very youthful population and predominantly a Muslim population. And so what I was exploring in the ethnographic work, which is a collaborative work with Somali people themselves, it's a community-based project. It's not purely an academic piece of research or pursued purely by academics, was how young people navigate themselves through the spaces of the city, exposed as they know they are to patterns of racialization and disadvantage. This is the team. As I said, it is a mixed team in terms of both gender and background, with Somalis working on the project with myself and my partner, Dr. Andrii Williams in Cardiff. We've been working on this over time for some years. It goes back to prior to the pandemic. This is just showing where Somalis and other minority ethnic communities are concentrated in Cardiff. This is an index of diversity. Actually, areas where minority populations live in Cardiff, as in other cities, are often very diverse, but they have a low representation of the white ethnic population. It also correlates with deprivation. So these are often in South Cardiff, areas around the former docks, which are highly deprived. Where I'm running out of time here. Sorry, these slides are so long. Again, linking to the first part of the presentation, segregation has been falling. So this is a chart ranked on the indices of segregation for indices of dissimilarity. Sorry, for the 2011 census. I'm sure people are familiar with the index of dissimilarity. It's a standard measure of segregation varying between 0 and 100. We can see here that some groups have quite high levels of segregation, even in the most recent census of 2011. And that includes the other Black and Black African populations that encapsulate the Somali population in Cardiff. Although, again, overall, the picture of segregation for all groups is that it's generally falling, with some exceptions. There are also strong patterns of material deprivation. We're talking about a working class population who are often exposed to the hardships of material deprivation, of poor housing, lack of opportunities in terms of employment, and so forth. And again, you can see here the Black African and other Black populations that encompass the Somali population are often the most deprived, getting on for around 2/5 and more of those census categories are concentrated in areas of the highest relative material deprivation. All I want to do now is just to illustrate some of that. So what's happening in terms of how people are exposed to difference as they move about the city, but also how when they move out of their comfort zones. And there's one of the key themes that's been coming out is about urban mobility, where people take buses or trains out of the core area of their community and feel unsafe. They feel that they are exposed to a racialized gaze. It's just one quote here. Buses in central Cardiff are broadly fine, but as soon as we go down to Barry, Ely, or St Mellons, we get stared at. This kind of exposure to being the gaze, the racialized gaze, and issues of visibility. Similar themes also in these quotations here. Again, I'll just pick out some of them. I was verbally abused a number of times, even as a young teen, always feeling uneasy and discriminated because of my religion or my colour. Again, concerns about safety when moving about the city. Here's a young Muslim man talking about issues of fear that he feels exposed to. I think it's just me, but when I wear Islamic clothing outside, I feel the need to smile constantly at non-Muslims to show that they shouldn't be afraid, and I shouldn't have to. But the way things are going, it makes me want to. So, performing in a way that tries to manage his own fear, but also overcome the fear of the other in the sense of the wider white population. Just trying to click the okay. I won't have time to go through these in any great detail, but mobility is a source of challenge. There's also exposure to educational discrimination, issues of teacher perceptions, and also wider student attitudes. There has been a persistent problem of underperformance, or had been, I put it in the past actually, of underperformance educationally of Somalis in Cardiff, but that's because of community activism. That's corner has been turned, and actually there are some very high performing Somali students and pupils in Cardiff. But it creates an onward problem, something that we're calling in our written work fractured transitions. There's an issue of Somalis overcoming prejudice and discrimination in educational spaces, schools, colleges, and universities, but they're not being able to gain employment because of discrimination in employment, and having to take employment which is lower than their educational status, taxi driving and call center employment being some of the key ones. And then the final theme I just wanted to touch on was about belonging. This links again to the issue of diaspora and how racialization kind of intervenes in the way people form attachments. Amongst many of the Somalis that we've been working with, there's a very, very strong, as I said before, a very strong sense, a proud sense of being Welsh and being British, and also a bit belonging to Cardiff. Many of the young people were born in Cardiff, but they also have a strong sense of attachment to Somaliland. And in part that's driven both because of parental ties and mirroring what the parents think in terms of their attachment to Somaliland, but also secondly because of negotiating racism that they're exposed to in the Cardiff context, a sense of trying to figure out where they belong. Do they belong in Wales, in South Wales, or do they belong in the homeland, and it's negotiated. It ends up being a bit of both, although it's liminal. That for some they feel that actually they don't belong in either place fully. They're trying to work that out for themselves. And so that was a strong theme from this study. I'll bring this hurriedly to a conclusion. In short, what I'm trying to argue for here is an approach to studying issues of race and ethnicity that builds on the strengths of census-driven quantitative demographic analysis that is showing some very important insights in terms of what's happening in neighborhoods, where people are living, where people are choosing to live, and how we are increasingly over time becoming a more mixed, less segregated society, but which conjoins that insight with more fine-grained investigation of the kinds of negotiations that people are having to enter into, particularly of non-white minority ethnicity, to adjust to what continues to be, in many areas, a society reflecting patterns of race and a history of racism. And the theoretical turn here would draw on critical race theory and associated thought, Frantz Fanon, among others, that enable us to link across the micro scale, the scale of embodiment and of agency, to the wider macro scale of population change and institutional structure. And I think this is very important in terms of, again, coming to the focus of the conference, how we find the middle ground and how we find ways of negotiating our belonging in a manifestly diverse society and a diverse future. And I'll leave it there. And apologies that I went over time.
Dear Richard, thank you so much. It was extremely interesting for us. And I even didn't know before that you have that kind of questions and problems, and you really research this issue very, very deeply. It actually gives us very good answers, how to go further, how to act, how to build that bridges of trust between different ethnic groups. And I understand one of the key words is education, and also contacts between the people, that you know each other, and it takes off the mistrust. Is it true?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Critical.
And we have also here in the audience possibility to put the questions, to ask something, which is interesting for us. Here in Estonia, we don't have so much big Muslim community actually still. But we have to consider all these aspects also in our integration policy, how really avoid contradictions, avoid misunderstanding between people. And I have one question here, which is here in my electronic equipment. And I would like to ask you, so the question is, also it's important to understand the reasons of segregation. Question remains, what could be done to encourage desegregation and overcome discrimination? Very basic question to you.
No, it's a fundamental question, isn't it? I mean, I do feel that actually, in part, the answer is in creating the opportunities for dialogue and for coming together. And actually, this is the kind of work that is being pursued under the heading of encounters. There's actually I haven't had time to touch on it, and perhaps other speakers, I know there's at least one other speaker from the UK, might touch on this. There has been a project of developing policy under the theme of community cohesion in the UK. It's quite contested. There are problems with it, but some part of it was well focused in terms of trying to think about how to bring together people of different backgrounds so that they can overcome some of those lingering issues of stigma and prejudice. In terms of the work that I do with, particularly with young people of different backgrounds, not only one background, of different backgrounds, one of the things that came out of that kind of social policy were things like youth parliaments. Really, really important, in terms of bringing together people, young people of different backgrounds who might not otherwise meet in their neighborhoods, to find common cause and find common ground, and often think and begin to think politically, and critically, about their social worlds. And of course, schools. There's a lot of work also parallel to the work on segregation in neighborhoods in terms of segregation in schools. But schools and co-education are critically important in terms of offering opportunities to meet, to form friendships, to form bonds, and to create the terms of social trust. But particularly for young people in that kind of formative, period of life. But it really is about creating opportunities for meeting and dialogue, and encounter, I think, broadly construed.
Thank you so much. I myself have one more question, very short question to you. You told before that the Somali diaspora in Cardiff, they know also or have connections with your motherland, with Somalia. And my question is, how much the young people or these people know about the history of Somaliland, and do they have a special subject at school as well, like history, culture of Somalia?
That's there are two linked questions there. The young people that I know are very conscious of their connection with Somaliland, and I stress that it is Somaliland. It's difficult because the international country is, as you know, I'm sure, is Somalia. Somaliland is an unrecognized, kind of seceded, self-declared autonomous state within the territory of Somalia. Most Somalis in Cardiff, and in some other places too, trace to Somaliland, which was the old British protectorate. And there's a huge awareness and cultural consciousness of being a Somalilander in Wales, and in other parts of the UK. And that does become politicized for young people that I know and work with. There's been a huge sort of agitation to get British recognition of an independent Somaliland. It hasn't happened for a variety of complex reasons geopolitically. But young people are very involved in that. So there is this hyphenation of their identity as being both British and Somalilander. Ethnic Somali, but Somaliland in the territorial, the national identity sense. In terms of education, there is it's not. I think there's a broader question there about how far and to what extent issues of British imperialism and its legacies are taught on the curriculum. Now, it's a while ago that I was at school, but from what I hear, there's still an insularity in the way history is taught. For example, the Industrial Revolution is taught in a sort of as part of an island story in the UK, rather than a global story in terms of the emergence of empire and the creation of markets and the exploitation of resources. And so, broadly, I think there is a lack of both broad and specific educational discussion of these kinds of topics. But it is changing, and there is. I speak very much from a South Wales perspective rather than the wider UK. The Welsh government and the Cardiff City Council are quite progressive in some key areas in terms of acknowledging the importance and the history and the connections between Wales and Somaliland. So Cardiff City Council has recognised Somaliland's right to exist as a separate state, and the Welsh government hasn't. But those discussions continue, and there is a lot of support for Somalilanders in Cardiff as an important diaspora group. So it's changing, but there, you know, there are further changes that need to come in that respect in terms of education.
Yes, thank you so much, Richard. It was really interesting for me. I think we could have a long discussions about it. Thank you so much, and applaud to our first presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I'm going over to Estonian language. Nüüd ma lülitun ümber eesti keelele.
So I'm switching over to Estonian. I'm very pleased to invite our next speaker, Keit Spiegel, my colleague from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And she is a counselor on diaspora policy, and she's also involved in everything that concerns Estonia abroad. She's also worked at the Estonian Ministry of the Interior. She has studied abroad in Romania, in the UK, in Georgia, and if I remember correctly, well, she'll actually tell us herself, and her topic is about Estonians abroad. So how do we perceive Estonians abroad? And that Estonians living abroad, the Estonian diaspora is actually a part of Estonia. Keit, the stage is yours, and the floor is yours. Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here. I would like to welcome you here at the Culture Cauldron and those of you who are following us online. As Anneli, my colleague, mentioned, my name is Keit. I work at the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and for 3 years I have been shaping the Estonian diaspora policies abroad. I'm very pleased to discuss this topic, Estonians abroad. Could I have the next slide, please?
Saime tööle. Meil on Eestis ainult umbes 1,3 miljonit.
So Estonia is a country of 1.3 million residents, but quite a large number, an estimated 200,000 Estonians actually live abroad. So how come such a small country, Estonia, has so many Estonians abroad? There are different reasons. As I'm sure many of you know, migration is something that is connected to personal reasons. There is no one answer or key that why is it so that people have moved abroad, and the same applies to Estonian communities abroad. So we can say that we have had 3 waves of migration from Estonia. We actually have to go back to the 19th century, because back then Estonians started leaving Estonia, moving abroad. In the second half of the 19th century, most Estonians moved towards Russia. It had to do with economic reasons, to look for better income, better work opportunities, but also education, because in the Russian Empire you could acquire higher university education. But Estonians also back then moved to the United States, to Canada, even South America. So from the second half of the 19th century, we see how broad the Estonian diaspora abroad is. Coming to the 20th century, we speak of the world wars. And Estonian communities abroad were affected by the Second World War in 1944, which has also been referred to as forced migration. This is known as the, so to say, the Great Escape. But back then, people didn't move to the east, but to the west. So the 20th century migration wave is the those who moved abroad for reasons. So in my work, I often encounter when people hear Estonians abroad, they automatically assume that they are the migrants who left during the Second World War. So that's when the traditional large-scale Estonian communities abroad were formed. But they don't give us a whole picture of everyone. And the third wave, actually, we talk about it, well, nowadays, the third wave is more or less finishing. Some say that it is still continuing. Others say that it has already finished. So Estonia regaining its independence. A few years before Estonia regained its independence, it was also pushed by the year 2004, when Estonia joined the European Union. Borders were open. Many Estonians left to study abroad, to work there, and also for personal family reasons. So the story of the formation of Estonian communities abroad, it's not a simple picture. It's quite colorful. So there are Estonians all over the world for different reasons. They have different backgrounds. This is what makes my work very exciting. But coming to the modern era, where are the biggest Estonian communities abroad? The largest community can be found in Finland. So there are not very long traditions for Estonians living in Finland. This third wave is what has brought this large Estonian community to Finland. Well, geographically, Estonia and Finland are close. Languages are related. There are a couple of tens of thousands of Estonians who permanently live in Finland, but others have a home in Estonia and in Finland, so they move across the borders all the time. And this is not anything new. I'm sure many of you have lived in more than one country. It's becoming something very normal and common. As I already have mentioned, these migration waves mean that we cannot just talk about people permanently living abroad. As I explained on the example of Finland, people move, but there are also people who have returned or those who are planning to return to Estonia. And the last few years have been quite positive because more people have returned to Estonia than have left Estonia. So our net migration has been positive over the last couple of years. But coming to the topic of our conference, searching for the middle ground, Estonians living abroad, where are they in our view? So how do we view them from the Estonian point of view, and how do they see us based on where they are located? There is no one simple answer. Everyone has a different reason for why they have left. The time periods that they spend abroad are different. Maybe they have been there for generations, they've left recently, maybe they've taken their families with them. So the variations are massive. There's an endless number of them. Another important fact is that the opportunities of these communities are different. Based on the Canadian Toronto example, where for decades many Estonians have lived, they have organized themselves into various societies, and this has been happening for many decades. Or we take a very small community of Estonians in a Southern American state. So there are very different opportunities that these people have. This also means that they have different expectations. How do we keep in touch? Or what is it that we can do to support these people so that their culture, language is preserved, even though they live abroad? I have put a few photos on this slide to illustrate how different these communities are. These photos are from different time periods. In the middle, we have a photo from the 1970s in the United States. You see a lady wearing Estonian national costume, American flags on the background. So based on these traditional generations, we can illustrate the story of how Estonian identity was kept abroad at the time when Estonia was occupied. So people really felt Estonians at heart and promoted Estonian ethnicity. They taught their children Estonian language, kept the culture alive, hoping that one day Estonia would regain its independence. The photograph on the very left pictures a schoolhouse. This is a schoolhouse in Siberia, in the village of Ülemsoetuk, where the Estonian language history are taught. Many Estonians live in this village of Ülemsoetuk. I visited them 18 months ago. It is amazing how geographically so far from Estonia you walk around the streets of the village and you hear Estonian language being spoken. Of course, perhaps because the vocabulary has remained archaic, but you hear Estonian. So I do hope that the Estonian language will still be taught at the times that are quite difficult nowadays. The top right photograph features a project, the design of a building. Estonians in Canada are planning to build the International Center of Estonia. This building is hopefully to be constructed, and we then hope that it will be completed. It will not be for just Estonians in Canada, but it will also tell the story of Estonians abroad, introduce Estonian culture to the rest of the world. And this fun photograph of a group of people it was photographed in Viljandi, in Venevere, where every summer we have a summer camp for Estonian young people living abroad. We always have more applicants than we can take. The feedback we get from these young people, based on the time they have spent in Estonia, is really inspiring. Many of those youngsters who attend this camp or visit Estonia, they later return to Estonia. They come to study, work here, do some sort of work practice, or just visit more frequently, visit their friends, visit their family, so they carry Estonia with them. I would also like to make a summary of a survey which, sort of sums up what I've stressed previously, how different our communities abroad are. This year, we completed the largest survey of the Estonian diaspora that we've ever conducted. So we have actually been working on it for a couple of years. Well, obviously, it's a very challenging subject, but when reading the initial results, we were very happy to see that the uniting factor is that people who are Estonian living abroad, they are all part of our society. They want to be connected to Estonia. They want to know what's going on in Estonia. They actively take part in many societies, Estonian societies. So those communities of Estonians living abroad, they're not separate. Or physically, yes, they are away from us. But they are Estonians living abroad, they're part of our Estonian society. It's just that geographically their home is in a different country. So how do people keep in touch with Estonia? Well, they visit frequently. Over 50% of them celebrate various Estonian traditions, like St. Martin's Day, that was a few days ago, celebrating Christmas in the Estonian way, the National Day of Independence in February, or the Day of the Restoration of Independence in August, media consumption, but within the communities there are various Estonian media related news, learning Estonian. There are a number of Estonian schools abroad. Well, they're not like schools as we normally know them, but they're sort of like hobby type of schools on weekday evenings or at weekends. But it's a system that has been developed for learning Estonian language and culture. But, as I mentioned, we have challenges. The fact that Estonians who live abroad want to be part of our society, it is something that we should be happy about. But when living abroad, it's a sort of an effort. Thinking of our world geographically, the further we go, the more difficult it is to keep this alive. For example, when we just take the Estonian language, if we think of our everyday life tempo, you have to take the extra time. There are very many mixed families, so you take the extra time of taking your child to this hobby school where Estonian is taught. This is something that we should compliment these people for and support from the sort of government side. Exchange of information is what has to be kept going. Estonians abroad know what are the opportunities that the government offers, what are the projects that we fund, what are the support services. For example, if someone wants to return to Estonia or, well, is a newbie moving to Estonia. So this is something that the government should make sure we offer. To sum up my presentation, Together or Apart, as the title of our conference is also asking and searching for the middle ground. Well, obviously together there are so many different stories and reasons for why Estonians have gone to live abroad. They are part of our society, and we see that from our Estonian side, and we need to make it more known to the rest of the society that these people are part of our society. And the ones living abroad, they consider themselves part of our society. They want to know what's going on in Estonia. Often these people also participate at the elections. We have general elections coming up in spring. They teach their children Estonian, which is a wonderful thing. So as long as if the Estonian language is not kept alive abroad, then no matter how important it is, it's not really a factor that, we ignore. Yesterday, I returned from a trip to North America, met many Estonians. In Canada, I met a lady who was a fifth-generation Estonian, she didn't speak much Estonian, but she considered herself Estonian. She feels united to Estonia, where she's from and where she grew up. So she feels that she is Estonian. And this is something that we should praise, that everyone has something that makes them connected to Estonia. I'm also happy to take your questions. I'm also going to be here throughout the day. I would like to encourage you to get in touch with us at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please look at the survey materials. The report is available in full on our ministry website. Please have a look at our action plan. I'm afraid due to time constraints, I didn't have much time to talk about what the government is actually doing. I just gave you an overview, but we are always there to discuss and give you the information. I would also like to look at the website globalestonia.com. This website has a lot of practical information, what our Estonian communities abroad are up to, what events they are organizing, plus everything else. Thank you for now, and perhaps you have some questions. Thank you, Keit. Thank you for this presentation. So, for Estonia to keep in touch with the Estonians abroad is very important. Since 2004, we have a program of sort of Estonians abroad, and this program is being extended. Then we have a cohesive Estonia 2030 development plan, and Estonians abroad are also very firmly fixed in this plan. We have strategic goals, and as you mentioned, digital tools give us an opportunity to be in touch with the communities in different countries on different continents. It's easy for us to travel. It's also a bonus. And keeping emotional ties, as Keit, you mentioned the fact that you're a fifth-generation person from Estonia, but you don't speak Estonian, but you still feel Estonian. That means a lot. But before I give the audience to ask questions, a couple of questions that we've been asked via the internet. So what is the main objective of the Estonian state in regard to Estonians abroad? The most important is keeping in touch, a two-way communication, that we in Estonia acknowledge that we have so many Estonians living abroad. I believe that most of you know someone who lives abroad, either back and forth between two countries or permanently abroad. So how we form this message that most Estonians living abroad, they will not return to Estonia, but they have to be aware that they will always be welcomed back. So no matter when they get this idea in their head, they will have a place to come back to. Thank you. The second question is related to Russia. You showed us the photograph of the school in Ülemsoetuk. Estonians in Siberia, their Estonian language is wonderful. But Keit, in these complicated times in Russia, is Estonian still being taught? And what is the situation of those Estonian societies? The situation is very critical. In some locations, Estonian is still being taught. In other locations, unfortunately, we know that it's being paused, but hopefully it will continue at some point. So it's quite a tense situation, but we have not forgotten about Estonians living in Russia, and we try and support them as much as we can in these difficult times. Thank you. I would like the audience to have the opportunity to ask questions from Keit. Keit has a question. Good morning. We've talked about segregation. Estonians in their new home countries, are they very segregated, or are they sort of successful in integrating into these new societies? It's a very good question. I can say that, well, we cannot sort of give a concrete fixed answer. It depends on when the person has moved away, how long they have lived there. For example, this fifth generation person who has spent their entire life in this other country. But we know what Estonians are like. We actually adapt very well. So on the one hand, it makes life abroad easy, learning the language, entering the labor market, no matter what aspects. Our children are very successful studying abroad. But it doesn't mean that people have lost their sense of belonging. So the survey showed that Estonians are happy and satisfied with their life abroad, but they keep in touch with their home country, Estonia. So I just cannot give you a sort of one answer. We adapt well, we blend in to the societies abroad, but we carry this sense of Estonia with us. Thank you very much, but I'm afraid we should wrap up. I can see a hand, but perhaps you can ask Keit directly, as we're a bit pressed for time. Thank you, Keit.
Meil oli nüüd võimalus vaadata sellist diaspora ja integratsiooni või lõimumise temaatikat.
So we had the opportunity to see the topic of diaspora on the example of a big country, the first presentation UK, but then also on Estonian basis. But now I am happy to welcome our third speaker, Andrii Rybas, who comes from Ukraine, but as a matter of fact, from the political reasons, he had to change his place of living. He came here in March, and now he works in the Estonian Labor Inspectorate as a lawyer, and his task is to advise the foreigners who come to Estonia about the possibilities on Estonian labor market. And now we can get a glimpse of what does it feel to be in Estonia as a citizen of another country, and what are the needs, what do they feel. And we are going to listen to the presentation, Working in Estonia for Foreigners, Theory and Personal Experience. The floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, thank you. Andrii, I'm from Ukraine and I came just recently. I didn't have any plans to move to Estonia, but today I can speak about my experience from the point of view of a person who came to this country, and as the legal counselor working for Estonian Labor Inspectorate, who deals with people who come from Ukraine. And I'm going to give some specific examples, if you are interested, what kind of problems Ukrainians who come here have. And I would like to ask you that to pay attention to the fact that I cannot tell you 100% what people feel when they come to another country, but judging by my experience as a practitioner, I will tell you some words about it. So I'm going to speak mostly about the Ukrainians, and there are a lot of questions which arise when they arrive in Estonia. These are the very simple questions, but for the person who came to a foreign country and who is not prepared, was not prepared for that, are very important and topical. So when you come to Estonia, the first question arises: where to turn to and who can help you? My task is to ensure people that when you come here, everything is going to be fine. Of course, some time will go to have some documents ready, finding a place of work, and sometimes people think that everything should happen instantly. No, people should understand that there are some deadlines, some procedures that people have to go through, and it's important to go through those procedures, and it will take time, which is normal. And then you need to follow a special road map, which everyone arriving in Estonia should have. Another question that is asked: where to live? Thanks to the state, we have places where it is possible to find a place to live, and I would like to thank those Estonians who receive Ukrainian citizens and assist them on the spot. But of course, it is not sufficient, judging by this big influx of Ukrainians who come to this country. And of course, the question of residential place or residing is very important. That is why we need to work with the Ukrainians who come here. We need to explain how to buy a place to live or rent it, or people can rent a flat in a municipal house. And the main thing to ensure that they're not going to be left without any assistance. Another question: where to find work? And for me, as a legal advisor or a lawyer, was quite difficult to find, to think about. And as you can see, I speak Russian, so I don't speak Estonian or English, only Ukrainian and Russian. And it was amazing for me to find out that I was very popular in my country, but here I cannot find any work. And of course, the same question arises in the heads of many Ukrainians who come here. And of course, it is understandable, and they do have a profession which is okay in their country, but they are not so. It's not so easy to find work here. Of course, there are some special regulations how to find employment in Estonia, and we need to, of course, talk about that and educate people on this, because the person who has a place to live, who has something to eat, can be useful for the society as well. And these are very highly educated people who come here. They are professionals, and they just need some assistance and psychological support, as I said at the beginning of my presentation. Giving information is important on different other questions. For example, how to get pension, salaries, and different allowances. And people need to get this information once they arrive in the country. And of course, we should consider that these people are in special psychological conditions, so they see war and perceive war everywhere, in their head, in their body, in their soul, and that is why we need to make them need to socialize them and make them part of the society. And another thing that they ask is where they can educate their children, because the processes are different, and who to communicate with, who to socialize with. And I was lucky in the sense that I had some friends from Estonia, and I could find work, and now I can also socialize with the local people, and then I understand where I am, and I can navigate through different questions. But of course, it is not the case for everyone. If you are psychologically are somewhere in your country, then of course it is difficult to come out of that way of thinking. And then people who arrive in Estonia should understand that without Estonian language, it is not possible to live and work here. It concerns other countries as well. But I'm going to speak about what I am familiar with. Of course, in Estonia, we can use the Russian language. It is possible to get by, but then you cannot find a very good place of work if you speak only Russian. And here on this slide, then you can see the questions that are usually asked by the people who arrive in this country. That is why we may take them as the basis for devising the program for accommodating those local people. So I work for the Labour Inspectorate, and this institution is one of the examples of how it is possible to integrate people who come to Estonia. Of course, it is difficult because there are problems with legislation or language knowledge, but I hope that this Labour Inspectorate benefits from my presence at my working place, and later on I'm going to talk how Labour Inspectorate helps people and how they participate in integration of Ukrainian citizens. Here you can see the three main ways they deal with. First is counseling, oversight and settlement of labor disputes. I deal with counseling mostly. It may be face-to-face during presentations or using a hotline. And in my work, I also find answer different inquiries sent by email. And of course, when I get an inquiry, I understand that quite a lot of Ukrainians write to us. They write in Russian, and it is possible to deduct that those people are from Ukraine using their way of thinking and the way they write their ideas. And then we offer them counseling during a presentation or face-to-face or by email. Then we also run information campaigns, speak on labor law issues in the media, and provide explanations to employees and employers on labor law matters via a hotline. Of course, now there are questions how to have those information campaigns, which ways to use to speak about different options in Estonia. So we can have campaigns online. We also publish different posters. Here you can see that it uses some Ukrainian language, so it means that the Ukrainians can get hold of it. And then here you can also see the material of information campaign, which is run by Labour Inspectorate. The main questions that are asked is where to look for work, how to talk about work relation, what kind of salary a person can get, how to negotiate an employment relationship, then what kind of holidays there are available, how they can be used, how they're paid, and then how to terminate employment contract. Of course, there is some kind of discrepancy of formation of these working relationships in terms of employing Ukrainians, because some of the Ukrainians do not know what kind of legislation exists. But we work on raising awareness of the Ukrainians on these matters. And, for example, now when we settle different work-related disputes, then we can see the tendency that most of the disputes are won by Ukrainian employees, and we think that it is due to the right oversight and different organization of campaigns and seminars for Ukrainians when Labour Inspectorate workers come to workplaces and check how those working relationships and contracts have been concluded, and check the conditions of the Ukrainians working on this or that working place. And then, of course, everything is getting better. So here you can see some of the contact information of Labour Inspectorate. People keep calling us, and we help in very many different ways. And I hope that some people, academicians, will also like what I have wanted to talk about. That's it. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Андрей.
Yes, thank you, Andrii. It was very nice to listen to you. So when you came to Estonia because of war, did you know anything about Estonia before? And what were you surprised by in this country? Of course, we are... I knew quite a lot about Estonia because I was born during the Soviet times, and then there are some of the enterprises which are located in Estonia, and those enterprises were my clients, for example. And then I, of course, like Estonia and other Baltic countries, and Estonia stands out in this sense. And of course, I knew much about Estonians. They are very hard-working, calm people, and then it is still the same opinion that I have about these people.
Were you surprised that something was really different from the Ukraine situation? Yes, actually, as I mentioned, I didn't have any plans to move before the war. And I'm also coming from the eastern part of Ukraine, so I didn't have a lot of opportunities to travel, and I haven't been to Europe. But after getting to Europe, I had the same question: why Ukraine, such a big and rich country, is not living like Estonia? Why there is such a difference? And how is it possible to build up the life in this very good and modern way in Estonia, in considering these limited resources and considering this life around it. So I really liked the organization of transport, education, medical services in Estonia. So I just have these questions. Why and how did you do that? So I'm happy that you are getting the answers to these questions within your time here. And we really want the people who come here because of the war to get correct information, and we want them to become registered as Estonian citizens. So the people who came here from Ukraine, almost 40% of them already found job, and this is a very good number if we compare it to other countries with a similar situation. But what are the biggest worries? What are the biggest needs of these people? So in connection to work and education, what are the biggest challenges? What are the most ordinary questions that they ask? So, if you're asking about the request to labor inspectorates, then they mostly talk about the wages, about the regime of the work conditions, about the termination of the work contract. So these are the questions that they ask. But in general, the Ukrainians are mostly worried about everything. So they are worried that there will be no electricity, there will be no water, that they won't get access to medication, because they really suffered from this type of conditions, and they are still thinking about that. And this is the first thing on their mind. And of course, they are asking, will I have in future any money so to live and to survive here? So thank you so much. Thank you, Andrii. So, unfortunately, we are living in the situation that we don't have any more time to continue the discussion because the coffee break is coming, but you still have time for one question. So if there is any question from the audience, so if you want to pass the question. But me personally, I have one question on my mind regarding integration. What is the most important? So this is the word integration that connects us, because we should be together. So what is the most important here? Andrii or Keit or Richard?
What is a common word to integration? What is the most important, which carries the value of integration? What is common sense, or the key word to integration? Successful integration. What do you think? Maybe you can respond me. Is it freedom? Is it democracy? Is it respect to each other? So I think it's respect to each other. So thank you so much to share your values, share your nice, interesting presentations, and we really are going all together forward to create better Europe, better world. And thank you so much for your kind attention to the subject, diaspora, integration and migration. Thank you so much and have a nice day.